Just a few weeks ago, the U.S. declared the military takeover in Niger a coup. The U.S. Constitution says that the U.S. cannot establish relations and offer aid to a country hit by a coup. Therefore, aid worth $500 million to Niger was suspended. However, it raised questions about why the U.S. took so much time. Perhaps the U.S. did so after France insisted on it. However, doing so threatened the U.S. military and drone-based presence in Niger. How could it cut the aid and still stay in Niger? Earlier, it was spread in the news that the U.S. might be preparing to withdraw from Niger, leaving its drone base and ending all ties. However, just recently, we saw something happening in the U.S. Senate that exposed a lot about what the elites in the U.S. are thinking. A resolution was presented in the Senate by Senator Rand Paul that ordered Biden to call the U.S. troops back from Niger. Yet, the voting done on this resolution stunned everyone, exposing what the U.S. is really planning to do with Niger. So, what happened in the Senate and how the U.S. is plotting against Niger? Let's know about that in this video. Just recently, the U.S. Senate rejected Senator Rand Paul's proposal to withdraw U.S. troops from Niger in the aftermath of a military coup in the country. The resolution suffered a resounding defeat in an 11-86 vote, with support from only 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and independent Senator Bernie Sanders, all aligning with Senator Paul's position. Senator Paul's measure aimed to direct President Joe Biden to withdraw all U.S. troops from Niger within 30 days, invoking Congress war powers as outlined in the U.S. Constitution. The resolution underscored that, as of June, the U.S. had over 1,000 troops in Niger, marking the second-largest U.S. military presence on the continent, without explicit congressional authorization. Before the vote, Senator Paul criticized President Biden for relying on post-9/11 war powers to justify the troop presence in Niger, contending that it lacked relevance to the situation in Africa. The Senate's rejection of the legislation, with a vote of 86-11, indicates an ongoing U.S. military imperialism in Niger despite the recent coup. Although the U.S. formally declared a military coup in Niger earlier this month, leading to the suspension of official assistance, U.S. officials have conveyed no intentions to modify the U.S. troop presence in the country. Niger has played a pivotal role in the U.S. fight against Islamist insurgents in Africa, hosting approximately 1,000 Department of Defense personnel. However, Senator Paul argued that these troops were deployed without proper congressional approval, expressing concerns about jeopardizing American lives amid the conflict in Niger. In a Senate speech, Senator Paul questioned the rationale behind maintaining over 1,000 troops in Niger, especially in a country governed by a military junta. In response, Senator Ben Cardin, the Democratic chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, cautioned against a sudden withdrawal, suggesting it could create a vacuum that might be filled by Russia or its partner, Wagner mercenaries. You see how they are playing like hypocrites. On the one hand, the U.S. calls it a Niger coup, while on the other, it pretends to care about the security situation. Senator Cardin emphasized the necessity of paying more attention to the region and avoiding abandonment signals. But the reality is that it's the U.S. that does not want to be kicked out. Over the past decade, U.S. troops have been involved in training Nigerian forces in counterterrorism and operating military bases, conducting drone missions. But these missions have benefited the U.S. more than Niger, giving its valuable intelligence about the continent. Earlier this month, the United States formally acknowledged a military coup d'etat in Niger, leading to the official suspension of assistance. Despite this acknowledgement, U.S. officials have expressed no intention to modify the U.S. troop presence in the country. We do not give enough attention to that part of the world. We certainly don't want to signal that we're abandoning that part of the world, stated Cardin. See how they talk about Africa and its countries. They feel entitled to be there and maintain a military presence, deciding about these matters in their Senate. But the reality is, matters like these should be discussed in Niger on whether the U.S. troops should be kicked out of the country or not. But this stands against what the U.S. did earlier. The United States officially acknowledged the military takeover in Niger that occurred in July as a coup, a decision that imposes limitations on U.S. military aid and collaboration with a country considered a critical counterterrorism ally in the region, according to a senior Biden administration official. We're taking this action because over the last 2 months we've exhausted all available avenues to preserve constitutional order in Niger, the official explained to reporters on Tuesday. However, the available options were not about resolving things but ensuring Mohamed Bazoum returned to the presidency. The Niger military junta was in no mood to take direct orders like that. Therefore, the US tried blackmailing the junta this way, threatening to cut off aid. When the Niger military junta paid no attention, the US used the only option it had, which was just to end the aid. The official mentioned that the US had urged the military leaders responsible for forcibly removing the president from power to reinstate a civilian and democratic government within the 120 days mandated by Niger's constitution. However, the military officials did not adhere to these constitutional guidelines. In fact, they've told us that they've chosen to repeal that constitution and are now in the process of creating a new draft with an uncertain timeline, the official added. Currently, the US Embassy can continue its operations, and the US military has chosen to maintain forces in Niger, according to administration officials. However, the US is refraining from engaging in any partner missions or training with Nigerian forces, a practice in effect since the coup occurred in late July. As of now, around 1,000 US personnel remain stationed in the country, but decisions regarding their continued presence have not been finalized. Intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance operations via US drones are ongoing, with the official noting that these activities focus on monitoring for threats to our forces, including threats from violent extremist organizations. There are concerns among current and former US officials that the limited intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance efforts may hinder international initiatives to support local security forces in combating terrorist organizations. Niger has long been regarded as a hub for counter-terror operations in West Africa, with the US investing millions in a new drone base in Agadez, Niger, which commenced operations in 2019. France initiated the withdrawal of its 1,500 troops from Niger and terminated its cooperation with Niger's military in response to the coup, as stated by the French Armed Forces Ministry. The French ambassador also departed the country. When the Biden administration formally designated the July military takeover in Niger as a coup d'etat, it allowed Washington to take measures to restrict most forms of US assistance to the Nigerian government. A total of $200 million in US aid, which had been put on hold since August, is now suspended. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller asserted, "Any resumption of US assistance will require action by the military junta to usher in democratic governance in a quick and credible time frame." When the coup was officially acknowledged, the US officers started spreading rumors about the US troops' withdrawal from Niger. The United States started contemplating the potential withdrawal of troops from Niger in weeks, signaling a significant shift in the American military presence following the coup. Two US officials suggest the possibility of withdrawing up to half of the 1,100 troops stationed in Niger. However, a final decision was yet to be made, and the precise number of troops to be withdrawn remained undetermined. Since the military coup, the US maintained its military presence in Niger, with troops stationed at 2 air bases and the embassy in Niamey. According to 3 US officials, the relocation of troops from Air Base 101 near Niamey to Air Base 201 near Agadez was driven by a capacity issue. Despite the announcement by the Pentagon regarding troop relocation, the smaller capacity of Air Base 201, which operates drones, presents challenges, potentially leading to the departure of some troops from the country. It was reported that the withdrawal of troops could begin in the coming weeks, contingent on the conditions on the ground, as stated by one official. Nevertheless, the Pentagon's goal is to sustain a military presence in Niger for as long as possible. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Reports suggest that the Biden administration has been exploring options to maintain US forces and assets in Niger for anti-terror operations, despite the uncertain political situation. The departure of non-essential personnel and contractors is planned, and the relocation of some troops has been coordinated with the Nigerian military. The US government underscores that there is no immediate threat to US personnel or violence on the ground. Yet, It was reported that the U.S. military was preparing for the worst-case scenario, which meant evacuation from Niger. Preparations were in progress for a potential U.S. military evacuation from Niger, even though a senior U.S. general indicated that any final decision was still weeks away. During a virtual briefing with members of the Defense Writers Group on Friday, General James Hecker, the commander of U.S. Air Forces Europe and U.S. Air Forces Africa, informed reporters that his headquarters had been getting ready for various scenarios that might have compelled around 100 U.S. troops to vacate 2 air bases crucial to U.S. counterterrorism efforts. He stated that the U.S. troops were ready to leave Niger if something happened. He also said that there were a lot of hypotheticals they could come up with about why and if the U.S. should evacuate. The U.S. just had to be prepared for all of them. For weeks, U.S. officials had been cautioning that Washington might withdraw its support for Niger if the military officials who ousted Nigerian President Mohamed Bazoum last month failed to reinstate him. Despite these warnings, the U.S. had refrained from labeling the situation in Niger a coup, a designation that could have significant impacts on the existing military partnership. Airbase 201, a U.S.-built facility costing $110 million, had played a crucial role in the counterterrorism mission, conducting drone flights with MQ-9 Reapers since 2019. General Hecker stressed that the planning for a possible evacuation from the 2 bases was prudent and precautionary. His teams had considered scenarios where they might be called upon to evacuate civilians and even the U.S. Embassy under duress. There were also ongoing preparations for potential alternative bases for U.S. air assets in case they needed to leave Niger. General Hecker mentioned, "We would have obviously looked to some other allies in the west of Africa there that we could maybe partner up with and then move our assets there. We had just started looking at that, where we would like the base to be." He added that decisions about alternative bases would be more diplomatic and coordinated through the State Department. You see, that's the mentality of the U.S. It wants to have a military presence in Africa, no matter which country we are talking about. Using its drone bases, it can carry out surveillance missions, gathering intelligence that gives it an upper hand. For the U.S., and in general, this intelligence is more precious than resources like gold and diamonds. Later, we saw more intensity in the evacuation plan. The U.S. announced that it was readying plans to evacuate drone bases if necessary under Niger's new junta. The United States was taking precautionary measures to plan for a potential evacuation of 2 vital drone and counter-terrorism bases in Niger if deemed necessary under the new junta in the West African nation, according to statements made by Air Force General James Hecker, the commander for Africa. It revealed 2 things. One is that the U.S. was in no mood to leave, and 2, that the evacuation plan was contingent on what the Niger military junta ordered. The U.S. also started preparing plans to find alternatives, exploring potential alliances with the U.S.-friendly nations in the Sahara and Sahel regions, which are among the most active areas for extremist groups. Hecker clarified that, as of now, the Biden administration has not decided on whether the military overthrow of Niger's democratically elected president on July 26 would lead to the evacuation of U.S. diplomats or security forces from the country. U.S. bases in Niger, situated in Niamey, the capital, and the remote city of Agadez on the southern edge of the Sahara, have played a crucial role in counterterrorism efforts in an unstable region witnessing an increasing number of coups and encroachment by Russia's Wagner mercenary group. In the scenario where U.S. forces might depart, either due to an administration decision or junta orders, Hecker acknowledged that it would have repercussions on U.S. intelligence and counterterrorism efforts. Nevertheless, he hoped for a peaceful diplomatic resolution to avert such a circumstance. Hecker did not provide specific details on alternative West African counterterrorism posts under consideration, underscoring that diplomatic considerations would play a significant role in determining the location. The precautionary evacuation planning outlined by Hecker covers various scenarios, including a leisurely move-out and a rapid departure, focusing on transporting only the most sensitive material. Later, these reports seemed credible, as the Pentagon reported repositioning troops and military equipment within Niger. The United States was in the process of relocating specific troops and military equipment within Niger, alongside withdrawing some non-essential personnel from the country. This decision came 6 weeks after a military coup. As a U.S. military official stated, the troops were moved from Airbase 101 near Niamey, the capital of Niger, to Airbase 201 in Agadez, a facility situated in central Niger, where the U.S. carries out intelligence and reconnaissance missions, according to the official. Despite suspending these missions since the coup, the U.S. has upheld its military presence in the Central African nation until now. The official emphasized that this relocation was executed out of an abundance of caution and does not indicate a significant change in the country's overall number of military personnel. However, it did convey a message that the coup had changed the entire U.S. plans in Niger. Perhaps the U.S. troops were moved away from Niger's capital to avoid any confrontation. The troop and equipment relocation between the two bases, separated by over 450 miles, was coordinated in collaboration with the Nigerian military. While the U.S. has previously conducted extensive training and exercises with the Nigerian military, such cooperation has been suspended since the coup. But later, we heard different news. It was reported that the U.S. military resumed drone and crewed aircraft operations in post-coup Niger. Earlier, the potential loss of a significant drone base in Agadez, Niger, loomed for the U.S. military in the aftermath of the coup. Initially designed for surveillance drones in 2014, the base has transformed over time, now hosting armored Reaper drones and being the largest facility in Africa. The 10-year USAGI agreement, inked with the previous government, expires next year, and relations under the new regime have shifted, with Niger aligning itself with Moscow and severing its former ties with France. The Agadez drone base, officially called Nigerian Air Base 201, played a pivotal role in the expanded U.S. military presence in Africa, representing the most extensive base-building effort ever undertaken by the U.S. Air Force. Diverging from many drone bases in Africa, Agadez required the establishment of comprehensive infrastructure from the ground up due to the absence of existing facilities, making it the biggest airman-built initiative in U.S. Air Force history. Beyond its operational center, the base encompasses well-equipped facilities like typical U.S. installations, offering recreational amenities and accommodations for its personnel. Now, it has become clear that the U.S. won't leave Niger on its own. The U.S. Senate has explicitly shown that it does not want U.S. troops out of Niger. The apparent inconsistency in the U.S. decision to suspend aid to Niger following the coup while maintaining its military presence in the country can be seen as a sophisticated strategic move. This move blatantly shows the U.S. disrespecting not only its Congress, but also ignoring democratic principles. Regarding promoting democracy versus security interests, the suspension of aid aligns with the U.S.'s long-standing commitment to advancing democracy globally. When a coup disrupts a democratically elected government, the aid suspension clearly signals that the U.S. values democratic ideals. However, if the democratic principles are being honored, why not evacuate a country hit by a coup? If the coup is the problem, why don't the U.S. call its troops back? That's the hypocrisy that the Niger military junta will handle now. In the balancing act between aid suspension and military presence, the former aligns with U.S. rhetoric supporting democratic norms, demonstrating a willingness to oppose undemocratic changes in power. The latter, retaining a military presence, emphasizes the U.S. habit of maintaining a military presence no matter what happens. But this won't continue. Since the U.S. has exhausted the only leverage it had against the Niger military junta, now it will be Niger's turn to answer. The U.S. could only suspend aid to Niger, which it already has. However, Niger's military junta is still holding its powerful cards, and one of them is to order the U.S. troops to leave the country. The Niger military junta is more powerful than the U.S. thinks, and it has already ordered high-ranking UN officials to leave the country. This shows that it won't shy away from doing the same with the U.S. troops and taking over the two bases the U.S. holds in the country. So, even if the U.S. Senate has shown what it wants and has rejected the resolution to call troops from Niger, the power resides in Niger's military junta. As of now, they are planning to ask the U.S. to leave, and that's why we saw U.S. troops being redeployed and repositioned earlier. Yet this has pretty much exposed the U.S. hypocrisy. it has shown that it wants to blackmail Niger by suspending aid and calling the takeover a coup. However, when it comes to calling the troops back and leaving its drone bases, the US starts advocating for security for Africa. What do you think? Isn't it US hypocrisy to end aid but continue to have a military presence in Niger? Should the Niger military junta kick out the US troops and take over the drone base, no matter what the US Senate decides? Let us know your thoughts on the hypocrisy of the US in its every action in Africa. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.